Kingscreek is a horror podcast, and thus the content in this episode may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
You are now entering Kingscreek. Episode 16, Private Investigator.
Alright, I turned it back on. Now sit down. Just sit.
Wow, you're being a little pushy, eh?
You're the one who agreed to an interview. State your name for the record, please.
Sure thing. Sarah Hickman, 24. Originally a Kingscreek native, but currently more of a traveler. And I can respect someone on the lookout for some useful intel. It's always conducive to a good investigation. That is what you've been doing here, right, Damien?
Yeah, Wait, hold... How did you know my name?
You have a clear familial resemblance to Mark. You have the same eye color, same hairline, same high cheekbones, same bump on the bridge of your nose, but you don't look so similar that it would make you his son or younger brother. Besides, he didn't have a kid when I knew him, and you are far too old for him to have had in the last 8 years. So that makes you a slightly more distant blood relative, probably cousin, or more likely a nephew based on the age gap. Mark once mentioned that he had a nephew called Damien, so logically, that's who it makes the most sense for you to be.
You are very observant.
It is my job. Besides, that was just basic deduction. I wasn't even 100% sure I was right.
How sure were you?
85 to 90%.
Oh yeah, really unsure. Okay.
Hey, never underestimate how much can go wrong in that last 10 to 15%. Most nuclear tests have smaller margins of error, but you don't expect them to be careless, do you?
So are you a nuclear scientist then? Is that your job?
Oh, you're funny. No, I'm a private investigator.
Really?
Yep, and I have your uncle to thank for that. I'm sorry for your loss, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Wait. When you were at the door, you said you were looking for Mark Bachman. If you knew he was already dead, why did you say that?
Because I didn't know. Not until you told me.
I didn't tell you.
Not with your mouth, no, but you have to admit, it's pretty obvious.
Is it?
I mean, yeah. This house is Mark's originally, but I don't see him anywhere. That, plus the fine layer of dust over most of his personal effects in this room, suggests that he hasn't been here in, I'd say, 1 to 2 years. The desk we're sitting at is relatively clean, but the fact that you're using it, combined with the spotless framed pictures of him on the wall that you've glanced at 4 different times over the last 2 minutes, suggests that he's been gone for a long time, and that you miss him. And with the only car in the driveway being the same dark green 1994 Jeep Wrangler he drove when I knew him, I don't think he's on a trip. So either he's dead or maybe in a coma. Either way, I'm sorry for your loss.
Stroke. It was a stroke.
That's what he died of? That makes sense. I'm sorry to hear he went that way.
How did you say you knew him?
Well, that's kind of a long story.
I've got time.
Alrighty then. Ever since I was a young kid, I've always gravitated towards puzzles. My favorite toy as a toddler was the shape sorter, that big wooden box where you put different shaped blocks into the corresponding holes. But once I did that a couple times, I started trying to figure out ways to put, say, the cylinder into the crescent hole. When I was a little bit older, my father would read me old Nancy Drew or Encyclopedia Brown books, even as I started figuring out the solutions a third of the way into the story. When I learned to read, I burned my way through as many detective stories as I could get my hands on. Everything from Agatha Christie to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, though my personal favorite was Dorothy Sayers. Soon, though, I started to get a little bored with detective stories. They're entertaining, but you consume enough and you start to learn the patterns most mystery writers use. If you read a Poirot or Miss Marple mystery, 9 times out of 10, the killer is usually the most eligible bachelor in the story. The formulas were getting a little stale. But you know what they say, truth is stranger than fiction. I decided to turn my attention to real-life mysteries. Growing up in Kingscreek, I figured I'd have a hard time finding your typical murder mystery in a mansion scenarios. But as I'm sure you've already gathered, the whole sleepy lumber town where nothing happens thing is, and always has been, a facade. There's no official reporting on it, but everything within a 5-mile radius of the center of Kingscreek is a hotspot for missing persons, unsolved murders, and just generally sightings of strange things. But at the same time, no one seems to want to talk about it. I felt it when I was growing up here, and I'm sure you felt it too. And, of course, in a world full of incompetent cops, the Kingscreek Sheriff's Department is the crown jewel of uselessness. I realized all of this at the ripe old age of 12, and like Nancy Drew before me, I decided to take matters into my own hands. It was the summer of 1996, right before I started 8th grade, when I took my first ever case. A girl from the high school, Phoebe Cartwright, went missing at a neighbor's 4th of July party, and hadn't been seen in nearly 2 weeks. Most people assumed she had wandered off into the woods and gotten herself eaten by a bear or a cougar, but that seemed unlikely to me. I hadn't talked to Phoebe directly, but I knew from my own observations that she was deathly afraid of the forest. My first thought was to acquire anything the police had uncovered in their investigation. This turned out to be remarkably easy because, as previously mentioned, they are worse than useless. But this turned out to be a double-edged sword because the case file had absolutely nothing to work with. All of the crime scene photos they had taken were either blurry or overexposed, they had somehow ordered an autopsy report for a missing persons case, and they didn't even have witness statements from anyone there. Not a lot of things truly upset me, but the mishandling of this case was kind of astounding. And I'll admit that I might have left some pretty judgmental graffiti on one of the desks, obvious enough that not even they would have missed it. So, with no clear leads, I started with where Phoebe had last been seen, the site of the party. A house on 124 Gossamer Lane, not too far from here actually. I was worried that the time that had elapsed since the party would mean that I would have nothing to work with. But once I asked the party's host, a woman in her 40s who, based on the tan line on her left hand's ring finger, had very recently divorced, for information, she was able to give me a complete guest list as well as a printed copy of the party's schedule. Very basic information that any investigator worth their salt would have found right away. You know, there are data studies that suggest that something like 90% of unsolved crimes are due to police incompetence. It's really...
Sorry, how does this relate to Uncle Mark?
Oh, right. Sorry, got off track. It's just something that's important to me. Anyway, I won't go through the whole investigation process of that case. It was simultaneously pretty simple, yet required an extremely thorough scouring of the clues available. I interviewed every guest, compared their stories, and eventually was able to piece together what happened. Phoebe had been hovering around some of the guests who had been, shall we say, nursing their beers a little too much. One thing led to another, and she ended up covered in someone's drink. Humiliated, she stormed out of the party early, leaving through the side door. It was almost too easy. Through a combination of footprint traces and broken branches, I was able to trace her path through the forest. The forest, which, despite my initial assumptions, she seemed to have taken a serious detour through. Up until this point, everything was falling within my wheelhouse. This was shaping up to be a fairly regular mystery, possibly even without any kind of dastardly villain to foil. I was disappointed at the time, but looking back, I can confidently say that even with how well I was pulling off my little detective act, I was still a 12-year-old girl. I don't know if I could have handled an actual human murderer, and as it turns out, I technically wouldn't have to. The first sign of things being off was where the trail ended. Wide, running footsteps led into the forest, but I found that once I reached a clearing, the trail just stopped. There weren't any prints leading out of the woods. It was as if Phoebe had reached the spot and just disappeared. The second part that immediately stood out to me was a message, which had been carved into a nearby tree. It was perfectly positioned so that Phoebe would have been able to see it from the spot her trail ended. On closer inspection, though, it actually didn't seem like it had been carved with a knife. There weren't any exposed layers or cut bark. It was as if the bark had just been warped inwards into the shape of the trunk. It didn't look so much like it was wood that had been carved with a knife. More like the tree somehow became a soft material, like clay, in which someone had drawn the message with their finger. Jagged, blocky letters spelled out a single word: house. And below, in small numbers, was a date and time for 2 weeks before, the same day that Phoebe went missing. Something about that message irked me. Not because it was a mysterious message carved into a tree in the middle of the woods. I was a 12-year-old mystery addict. That part was really exciting. No, it was because, despite all logical sense, I knew what house it was referring to. Kingscreek is a small enough town that you can walk most places, so once I started 6th grade, I walked to school on my own. It was completely fine for 90% of the route. Fun even. I liked being on my own. It made me feel independent. The only exception was when my route took me down Kendall Street. There's a single house on Kendall Street. It's right by the intersection where I made my turn towards the school every day, so it's not like I could avoid it. I don't know why, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It's not like it was a particularly haunted looking house, no broken windows or rotted wood planks. It was completely and utterly normal. And yet, I didn't know, it seemed wrong. This was the house that the message referred to. I was sure of it. I was less sure that I could go there, even if it was my only lead. But I asked myself, what would Nancy Drew do? It's not like the police would be any help, and who was going to listen to me on the evidence available? No, I had a good old-fashioned detective's hunch, and I had to be the one to follow up on it. When it actually came to visiting the place, I was less confident. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the house for a long time, frozen with indecision. The fading sunlight cast long, warped shadows across the house, accentuating the wrongness of it all. A part of me wished I had waited until the daytime to visit, just so that maybe it wouldn't feel like I was walking into a monster's open jaws. I shook away the thought. I didn't quite understand how, but a girl was in danger, and as far as I knew, I was the only one who could do anything to save her. So I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and marched up the driveway to knock at the door. I could still remember it all so clearly. When I knocked, my knuckles kicked up a fine layer of dust and splinters on the faded wooden surface. I heard the door unlock, and before I knew it, it was open, slowly swinging on creaking hinges. Now, I'm not an idiot. I knew, even then, that there was something up with this whole thing, and the creepy door that moved on its own was not helping the voice in the back of my head screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. But I also knew that Phoebe was involved somehow, and it was my mission to find her. Besides, if I were completely honest with myself, my curiosity as to what exactly was going on was far stronger than my fear. I love a good puzzle, and this was the most captivating puzzle I'd ever seen. I gently pushed my way past the door into the house. It was strangely dark. Sure, it was sunset, and it's not like any of the lights were on, but the depth of the darkness momentarily shocked me. It wasn't the darkness of an empty house. It was the darkness of a cavern deep underground. The kind where you can tell no light has touched the walls for centuries, if not millennia, and that light would never escape. Almost absent-mindedly, I felt myself walking into the hallway like I was being pulled on an invisible string. It felt strange. Not like I was being controlled or puppeted, but more like I was dreaming. I had this bizarre disconnect from what was happening, like the effect you get when someone smears Vaseline on the camera lens in a movie, only for my own thoughts. As I walked deeper and deeper into the house, only a small part of me registered that there weren't any windows, or hallways, or even any turns. It was a single, long corridor, unlit but somehow still visible. At the end, just barely, I could see the outline of a door. It was far away, but the closer I got, the more I felt my curiosity grow and grow, until it almost overpowered me. I just had to know what was behind that door. It was practically pulsing in the dim glow of the hallway. I felt myself reaching my hand out to the doorknob, static electricity tingling my palm and fingertips. But just before I could open the door, I felt a hand grab my shoulder and yank me backwards. The next thing I know, I'm standing on the front porch. The sun had fully vanished, and there was a man shining a penlight into my eyes. He was rail thin with a gaunt face, probably wasn't eating well, a mass of messy brown hair, and wild-rimmed glasses. No ring on either finger, or an accompanying tan line, suggested to me that he was unmarried. Cracks on his glasses and tears on his jacket suggested that he got into trouble a lot. Seems like my kind of guy.
Gross.
Oh God, not like that. I was 12 years old. Get your head out of the gutter. Besides, he wasn't my type. Anyway, he asked me if I was okay, asked me who the president was, and had me recite the alphabet backwards. When he had determined that I was mentally alright, he introduced himself as Mark Bachman, and that is how we met. He told me to stay away from the house from now on. Now that I was outside its walls, I felt much more alert and aware, and the intense curiosity that filled me just moments ago was now merely a faint echo at the back of my mind. So, I didn't argue with him. He told me that, unfortunately, Phoebe Cartwright was not coming back. This I didn't just accept, though. I badgered him about the details, asking him why she was gone, what had happened to her. I kept bugging him for years after that, but he never told me anything. And to this day, even with all of my studies, I still don't know.
Your studies?
I'm getting there, don't worry.
Well, can you speed things up a little? You've told me basically nothing about your relationship with Uncle Mark.
Calm down. I'm at that part now. Mark and I kept running into each other a lot after that. I kept doing my Nancy Drew thing, following up on missing persons cases and strange murders, and I would almost always find him snooping around the scene of the crime, writing everything down in a little notebook. I realized pretty soon that he was doing the same thing I was, trying to solve a puzzle. Only, it wasn't a puzzle of how someone was murdered. It was about trying to figure out the strange and paranormal, the kind of puzzle where you have to discover the rules for yourself as you play the game. Once I realized that, I knew I had to be a part of it. I started following Mark around, showing up wherever he had a case. He kept telling me I was putting myself in danger, but once I proved I could be useful with my deduction abilities, he relented. And so we worked together for 4 years, investigating Kingscreek all the while. In 2000, I was sent away to school overseas by my father, but I continued to be enamored with the supernatural. I knew that it was real to some extent. How else could you explain what I saw in Kingscreek? How else could you explain that house? But finding the edges of what was real and what wasn't was a challenge all on its own, and one that I was ready to take. After I finished school, I started traveling around the world, diving into any paranormal encounter I could. And, to keep the lights on, I became a private investigator. Recently, I decided to pay a visit to Mark, to see how he was doing. He hadn't contacted me in a few years, and now I see why. Can you tell me more about how he died?
What?
You said it was a stroke, right? You weren't telling the whole story. I could tell by how you fidgeted when you said it. There's something more there.
Yeah? What's it to you?
Well, like I said, he was my friend.
Yeah, and he was my uncle. I think that overrides friend who's half his age.
Look, I'm sorry if I'm intruding here. I know this must be hard for you, but I did travel all this way to see him. I would like to know what else there is.
Fine. Uncle Mark did die of a stroke, but I'm not convinced it was natural.
What do you mean?
I mean, in the last few months before his death, one of his big cases was this place called Crimson
Apothecaries? I see. I'm familiar with the name.
Right. Anyway, one of the recent-ish victims of Crimson had suffered a severe stroke that hospitalized him, and he almost died. Around a month before Uncle Mark suffered a stroke just like it, only this time fatal.
That is a compelling set of circumstances.
I've been trying to do some of my own investigation over the last week or two, but I haven't been able to get a ton of useful information.
Okay, laying the groundwork. Good job. What avenues did you pursue?
What?
How did you investigate? Did you search for building permits for Crimson's shop? Try and track down former victims? Look for the scene of the crime and investigate? What are we working with here?
I went down to the Misty Pond and asked people if they saw anything weird.
Are you joking? Please tell me. I'm not great with reading humor.
No, I'm not.
So you went to a bar and grill in this town and asked people if they saw anything weird?
Yeah.
And you say you haven't found anything helpful this way?
Look, when you lay it out like that, it sounds stupid, but...
No method of investigation is stupid. But, maybe I should go ahead and lay some groundwork. I'm going to go out and find a hotel. You stay here and look through Mark's files. Focus on the Type C cases, if you haven't already. Here's my pager number. Beat me if you find anything. I'll contact you in a little bit. It was nice meeting you, Damien. I'll see you soon.
Today's episode of Kingscreek was written and performed by Thomas S. Dennis, with additional voices by Dharma Torres-Aguilar. It was produced by James Makepeace, and the score was composed by Kai After Kai. Script supervision is provided by James Makepeace and Ryan Kennedy. Our cover art is by CyberGrapeUK, and our social media manager is Ryan Kennedy. All episodes are a production of Tracer Magnum Entertainment. If you'd like to support the show, rate and review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, or whatever service you use to listen to our show. It helps tremendously and ensures we're seen by more and more of the unsuspecting public. If you'd like to get in touch with us or become involved with the community, join our Discord server, post on the r/Kingscreek subreddit, or follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Tumblr, all under the handle @KingscreekOfficial. Share with your friends, family, or anyone else you want to ensnare in our web. And above all else, thank you for listening.